For Now and Zen episode 102, I had a chat with guitar player Owen Gardner of the iconic experimental rock band Horse Lords. Owen has his own music as well, which you can check out on Bandcamp. Horse Lords' polymetric, unfolding style has captivated a huge audience, and I was quite excited to finally dig into their influences, scales, and rationale. The new album is called Demand to be Taken to Heaven Alive. The Horse Lords' new album is out everywhere, right, essentially?
As everywhere, as far as I know. Yeah.
I noticed that you have a lot of guests on this album. Is
hmm
there any particular reason for that?
That was its own idea to have singers involved. We didn't want any of us to be doing that, just to sort of maintain this non-hierarchical relationship between us. And it was important to have more than one singer as well to sort of continue sort of diffusing this not to have any one singer stand out as like a lead. That basically to keep as much as possible from having like a lead voice. And then the others, I think that grew out of an idea, which I'm not exactly sure where this originated, but the idea on City Yet to Come to have like a sort of horn section. Again, I don't actually remember what the sort of origin of that was. But anyway, Madison and Weston are friends of ours. And so it was very easy to recruit them. And we were sort of eager to have I don't know, their input on that track. And then they were helpfully also recorded sort of extra drones and stuff that we could use elsewhere.
The statement that you made about the non-hierarchical nature of the ensemble interests me, as I've noticed that often with your albums, it's released with an accompanying and powerful, potentially political statement about, trying to approach utopia and have things be non-hierarchical.
hmm
So how does that sort of statement reflect in the ensemble?
I mean, yeah, we try very hard to keep things quite democratic between us, and I mean both democratic with regard to our internal decision making, and then also in the music itself. So it's both a way to distribute the music between us in a sort of equitable way where there's like no obvious sort of lead character, but also then it sort of I feel like it lets the listener in a more generous way where you're not really being like guided by something in particular. It's just like there's a lot of input. There's four people's worth of input, and it's sort of up to you to decide like what do I listen for, or what's the sort of center here. And that I think is a more or it's an interesting experience that's sort of fairly unusual.
Right. So it's quite philosophical as well as aesthetic. Of course, I would say it's relatively famous for the polymetric layers pulling
Mhm.
things apart. So, like, in this album, for example, in like Brain of the Firm, I noticed that you have these like groups of five and then arpeggios of four descending in the guitar over it. And it takes, I think you guys do it so cleverly that it takes some time to realize that you might be hearing a polymetric layering going on. I'm wondering how you come up with your polymeters as well. Is it maybe something that like one member of the band suggests? Like, do you try jamming? Do you come up with it mathematically? Like, what's sort of the angle?
It varies track to track. I mean, on that, sometimes it's more intuitive. Like on that one, Sam had come up with the basic. He had come up with the drum part, which we all found very appealing. And then sort of, it took a long time actually to sort of come up with something satisfying around that. And the sort of polymetric, yeah, the like there's this clap going the whole time, but it's like not the clap is in three, so it sort of turns the whole thing into this longer cycle. But it's still somehow, to me, anyways, still maybe I'm like so used to polymetric music now that it's not like a challenging thing to listen to in a way. So it's like it seems kind of like punchy or hooky to me to have this clap going, even though it's like then turning it into I guess this like 15 beat cycle, which is somehow it feels it's like you can't count it, but you can sort of feel it is what I would like to think. I mean, the sort of goal is that nobody's counting anything. It's like you sort of move beyond this. Ideally, the sort of rhythmic period is so long that you can't really count anymore. So you're just sort of like floating in this again sort of uncentered space where you can you feel sort of anchored because the pulse is very clear, but the meter is very ambiguous and
Yeah.
open to interpretation. So it's pretty rare. I don't know if that's true. I don't know. It varies from song to song, honestly. There are different times we approach it for different reasons.
My subjective experience is that I'd find that I'll latch onto a particular element and
Mhm.
that can be a cycle. But then after a while, I'll notice some other element and want to go there. And that's
Yeah,
kind of perhaps that hints at that state that you'd like to induce in the listener.
definitely. Yeah, or like yeah, it's sort of like analogous to like looking at an optical illusion, where it's like, is it a face or two faces or something, and you can sort of go back and forth between them and sort of play with your own perception that way.
I've always thought that optical illusions are tied to microtonality as well, and I wonder how you and or the rest of the band also arrived at the microtonal tuning system you used and what the process of setup was like for you.
I can only really speak for my own part, which I guess has consequences for other people. The bass is basically tuned to like a subset of my tuning, and that was kind of just that was a kind of top down thing where I just handed this bass to Max and said, you this is what you're working with now. So that was maybe a chip in our democratic armor there. But for me, it was a slow process, and it was a mix of sort of trial and error and more things I've been thinking about. I mean, playing the guitar and playing in like open tunings, like having the tuning be sort of tetrachordally oriented was important. And I'm also interested in like Arab music and other traditions where that are sort of tetrachordally organized. So that was an important consideration, and particularly with the way I play, which is mostly in like first position, and the nature of frets, that was an important consideration. So my tuning is basically the sort of seed of it is the harmonic series from 8 to 16, and that's basically just kind of transposed a few times, and that accounts for almost every interval in my tuning. There might be a couple exceptions, but definitely the harmonic series is the sort of anchor
Yeah.
for what I do. Bernie, the saxophonist, he has a more kind of open, more kind of like Parch like approach.
Of course, if you've got the saxophone, it's got maybe a little bit more freedom than some of these fretted instruments, although, of course, on the fretted instruments, you can bend. And I definitely was hearing maybe some pitches in this new one that seemed a little bit outside of your usual palette, but I don't really know the full palette as well as you do, of course, with 8 to 16. I hear some like 11 over 8 in some of these tracks on this album that I don't hear as much.
Yeah, no, it's true. And the same track where you're hearing that, you're also hearing 11/6, which of course is not in the harmonic series. So
Oh, yes, that was the other one I was wondering about, like in
yeah,
the voices. Yeah.
yeah. So I guess they made an exception there. I've been very seriously researching Mauritanian music for a long time, and it's actually not a typical scale, but there's one piece that I really got it sort of attached to that involves this. It's a pentatonic scale that's just 9/8, 11/8, 3/2, 11/6, and I found that sound very appealing and sort of reminded me of some like Appalachian music, and it was somehow a familiar sound and an appealing, kind of unusual and yet sort of familiar scale. So I wanted to sort of play with that. So I let the harmonic series kind of go for that. I mean, I'm not so doctrinaire about it. Sometimes it's important to me to keep it tied directly to the harmonic series. Other times, other musical considerations can override that.
I haven't researched the music in that country, but I think like you, try to look around and see what sorts of scales can come from interesting places and what they might contain. I also wonder what sort of attitude the writers and yourself here have towards mode. I definitely hear that G in the bottom as being the main note a lot of times. So I wonder
Definitely.
if you like if it's intentional that that sounds like the home note in the hypnotic grooves you're producing, or if you are sometimes trying to create different ones, or what.
In a way, doesn't matter. But yeah, G has definitely been the foundation for a long time. I think at one time it sort of mattered, and now especially now moving to Europe, because we're tuned to G, but like 50 hertz, the sort of electrical frequency there
Yeah,
is so close to G. So now I'm sort of I it's for some reason this is causing sort of like tension in my mind, and probably only my mind, that like why it seems sort of like, I don't really know how to say what I'm trying to say, but it seems like almost dishonest or something to be, or it seems weird to me to still be sort of like constricted by this sort of musical orthodoxy when there's, because G is like totally arbitrary. G is that's a made up value,
Yeah,
whereas 50 hertz is like something in our world.
yeah.
So sometimes I think the saxophone can't do it is the main reason we haven't gone up to 50.
Ah,
But on my own, sometimes I'll tune, or I've been influenced. Catherine Lamb's music?
I actually just talked to her,
Oh, funny.
and the 50 to 60 difference is
Exactly. So
a
she was
reason
probably
she
talking about
cited for 10 hertz. Yeah.
10 hertz. Exactly. So yeah, she's sort of converted me to 10 hertz thinking. So on my own,
Wow.
I tend to, like my solo album. I don't know if you heard that from a couple of years ago. That's tuned to 10 hertz. I don't do a whole lot on my own, but when I do, I tend to gravitate toward 10 hertz. And yeah, the band, there are on this record, there's a song that is more Andrew's song called Before the Law that involves more, that's the sort of saxophone heavy song. I think it's the eighth track or something like that. That definitely involves more like exploring different harmonic areas than we would normally do. And he has another song, Law of Movement, from our previous record, Comradely Objects.
Okay, Comradely Objects. Yeah.
That also involves a little more kind of like moving through different harmonic areas. And I think he was influenced in part by, or we were all kind of influenced by our work with Arnold Dreiblatt, which also involved more, although Arnold also has a very kind of focused on like one, always being present. But our work with him sort of also, and reading Tom Johnson's book, Other Harmony. I don't know if you've come across this.
I've heard of it, but I haven't read it. It's on my list.
It's cool. It's, I mean, in some ways, for a microtonalist, it's not so interesting. But if you read it with a sort of openness or something, I found it an interesting way to sort of think about harmony differently in a way that could easily accommodate, JI or any microtonal system. So that was also definitely inspiration to sort of think more in terms of harmony, which we kind of, or at least I have not really done, at least with Horse Lords in the past. Like I've sort of like the sort of lack of harmonic motion felt like a sort of, and yeah, more focus on like a modal texture felt like sort of a cardinal virtue. But now I think there are interesting ways to sort of involve harmony that doesn't have to have the same sort of like kind of narrative aspect that's Western common practice music has, that I don't really care for, that I at
Right.
least don't want to be a part of my own music.
Right. I wonder if that means that I suppose in the Horse Lord's future, things might become a little bit more harmonically based even. Who knows?
Conceivable.
Yeah. I certainly see some more of that on this record that I didn't think I would see, so it's
Hmm.
cool to think of the directions that could take.
Yeah. There's a lot of, I feel like a few doors have been opened that present sort of interesting new directions.
In the microtonality of the scale you use, I also perceive that like with the harmonics 8 to 16 going on and like, number 14 really being the seventh harmonic, like 7/4,
Yeah.
octave reduced and whatnot. I definitely hear that as a really strong element, and I feel like there might be a lot of music that splits the fourth almost evenly that seems to be, I think, for lack of a better term, easy on the ears, like even 12th enculturated ears that
Mhm.
normally reject things that don't do usual common practice Western stuff. They'll hear things like a 5-tone equal temperament or 7/4 being used and accept it as maybe even smoother than some chromatic Western music. So I'm
Yeah.
wondering, yeah, I don't know if that's something you've observed or something you considered when you picked out the scale or find any validity to.
Yeah, I find it interesting. I mean, for me, yeah, it's like these, yeah, seven especially can have on the one hand such a familiar quality, but also like you hear it in like barbershop harmony, for example, but then it like treated in a sort of, yeah, like 12 context, but it's ultimately like, I don't know, it feels so different. I mean, it's like this tension that the seventh is supposed to have in Western music is really just absent. You can imagine at least it being, and like Lamont Young, for example, like tries to just draw that out infinitely. So, and it sort of
Right.
doesn't register as tension anymore. Or it's like some kind of third thing or something where it's like neither tension nor release, but it's this. Yeah, I feel like I understand his interest in sort of infinite music because I feel like you get a sort of sense of that from these intervals, which, yeah, again, are familiar, but become defamiliarized with by the sort of locking together.
Yes. I find that sort of attitude to be just a beautiful monument to timelessness,
Yeah,
which is hard for us to really wrap our heads around, I think.
yeah. And I mean, ultimately, to me, it's as interesting to sort of peek at it, to sort of have like a window into timelessness and then to move on, as it is
Right.
to actually, I'm not really super interested in having, like 72-year pieces or something. Um, but yeah, I mean, I'm glad Lamont did it, and I'm glad other people are still pursuing this. It's definitely an idea and a sound that that was very important to me. Hmm.
How crucial is it for you that the scale in the Horse Lord's music be blended? I get a really clean, blended feeling from almost everything that you guys do, even when it's quite chromatic. I mean that if you've got multiple notes together, that they seem to lock in
Yeah,
barbershop like a large percentage of the time, unless
yeah,
you're intentionally introducing shimmer,
yeah,
like on that bagpipe thing that you did on that one album. I'm trying to
yeah,
remember which one that
yeah. We're
was.
definitely shimmering is sometimes called for, but yeah, definitely. I mean, yeah, it's sort of part of what I was talking about. That it's like harmony is not exactly the goal. Harmony as such, it's like it's more about this experience of harmonic sound, or like or this sort of sound of locking, and again this intimation of a potentially like infinite sonic experience is sort of the more important part. And sometimes just timbrally, I grew up listening to a lot of like fiddle music and stuff like this, and a lot of the like double stops will frequently be you know just harmonies, so that sound is sort of, and you hear it in country music too, this sound. So it sort of has a sonic appeal, or like timbral appeal, because it's kind of more timbral than it is harmonic anyway. So,
Right. Yes. I see
but
what you mean.
yeah, but I'm also interested. I mean, yeah, going back to harmony, I'm sort of interested in how these sort of timbral concerns can have harmonic implications, and how you might sort of think of a new system of harmony more based on the logic of just intonation and the logic of timbre, rather than wherever the Western harmony comes from.
And I think the logic of just intonation, of course, it can get carried away
Sure,
really quickly
sure.
mathematically. So it makes sense from an idiomatic perspective and like an orchestration based perspective for you guys to do the kind of music that you're doing where things are unfolding, and not, modulating to a lot of crazy places. Although, of course, you can do that, um,
Yeah.
if you wanted to. So you have your bass, right? And it's
Mhm.
footed for the new microtonal scale.
Mhm.
So you were kind of the first person to come into the band with that scale.
The band sort of started in part so that I could figure out what to do with. I had like a newly justly fretted guitar. I'm sort of like, what do you do with this? Like, how do you, what would,
Oh, that's
what,
interesting.
what is music that is, that this could, what, I don't know, what music would result from having this guitar? Because there's, as you know, really not, especially 15 years ago, there was really not any repertoire for just intonation electric guitar. Andrew is also like a just intonation musician, but he was not originally in the band. He,
Oh,
so I only introduced it in that I was the only person who was involved with it at that time.
do you think your earlier music, does it have that sort of hypnotic polymetric effect of your later music, or did the microtonality perhaps influence that in some way?
No, that's definitely a factor with the earlier music too. I think it's more thoroughly integrated and more kind of sophisticated, I think, in our later music, but it was always there. It was always an ingredient. We had been, three of us had been in an earlier band that was primarily improvised, but with a sort of basis. It was maybe sort of structured improvisation. And yeah, polymeter and just intonation were already concerns there. I've always been intrigued by the sort of physical unity between these. There's a continuum between polymeter and just intonation. Like ultimately, if you're playing a 5/3 polyrhythm, you know,
It's like a major sixth.
yeah, 10 octaves up, you get a major sixth. We haven't ultimately really done much with that idea, but it's somehow still a sort of animating idea. There's this sort of language of the language of ratios can be applied in many directions.
Oh yeah, that was one of the next things I was going to ask. I've done some exploration of that on my emoji album. What does the fretboard look like? Because since you're in JI, you would need an uneven fretting, right? So it's not straight
Yeah.
across. Okay,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, no, it is. They're both straight across. Yeah. I mean, there are just some notes that we can't play and some notes that are kind of extra notes
Oh,
that we just don't play
I
as a
see.
result of the straight across fretting. So yeah, the bass is just a subset of the guitar. So the bass only has 12 frets per octave, but they're all just.
Right.
And someday I think we will need to add. I think the time will soon come where we need to add more frets to the bass. But
Oh boy, that's going to be. I'll bet that's going to be a process.
yeah,
What sorts of notes are you thinking of adding, if I may ask?
I don't know. Well, he doesn't have. I find the neutral third very appealing. I have an 11 ninths on my guitar, so I might throw that in the bass. That would be helpful to have. And then he has an 11 sixth as a result of that too. I think that could be useful. That's the main one I'm thinking of. That's the main thing that feels like it's really missing on the bass.
Because you definitely find that sort of interval in a lot of traditional music from
Yeah,
around the world. So it really makes sense to add it to your toolkit.
yeah. And I mean, even in traditional American music, you hear it. So
So are you then one of the players that also works at the computer for the live performances as well?
no, that's Max, the bass player.
Okay, so that's Max. Okay,
Yeah.
I'm very curious about what sorts of programs one might be using on the computer to generate microtonal sounds, whether it be like, Max MSP or some kind of synthesizer or sampled sounds or keyboards or what.
He uses a super collider for the synthesis. There are also sampled sounds and some soft synths on the most recent record. Like there's a Korg M1 emulator that we've used some, which has microtonal capacity, and used sampling a little bit. I mean, sampling I find interesting too because it going back to what I was saying earlier, it's like you get this like exact there's an exact relationship between the like pitch ratio and the time ratio, and that I find, and you get this sort of timbral. There's timbral implications to that too, so you get this weird kind of sampled sound, which I find sort of appealing. And that gives it a sort of transparency to what you're doing that I find appealing. Super Collider is the main electronic component.
I always used Max because it's like, you know,
A
the,
little
the
more user
visual
friendly.
objects help. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I also find Super Collider pretty intimidating, but it's cool. I mean, it's very extremely powerful. So
Yeah.
I understand the appeal.
You mentioned that you were in another band with some of the guys who did improvised music, right? So
Mhm.
do you use improvisation in the Horse Lords at all, like in your main songs, or does the nature of the polymetric cycle kind of mean that you need to stay in a particular place?
I mean, you need to be sure that you know where you are, but that doesn't mean that improvisation is not possible. I mean, there's not much except outside of the saxophone. There's not a whole lot of improvising. I mean, there's a lot of like kind of improvised flourishes, or I mean, in theory, anybody could start improvising at any time. It's not like a rule or something,
Right.
and we're certainly not as strict as like if we were classical musicians or something. So there's room for ornamentation or for some amount of improvisation. I mean, it's certainly I feel like our attitude is kind of improvisatory, but there's ultimately not really a whole lot of improvisation, strictly speaking. I mean,
Right.
some many things are indeterminate, not so much as improvised. But it is interesting, yeah, with the polymetric stuff. It's like once you get into it, of course, like learning a piece, it's very challenging, and you can get into states where it's like a piece we were learning recently is just like if you get off, you're just screwed. You're just like
Yeah,
shot out into space,
I was
and
gonna ask about that next.
it's a terrifying experience, especially like live. If you just, yeah, it can take so little to get off, and then you have no way to know where you are until you somehow at some point, you play it enough, and then you're like, okay, I actually can orient myself in this texture, and that's a cool feeling. It's also in a way a cool feeling to get to when you make a mistake and are just like completely lost. It's
Right.
also it's not a good feeling exactly, but it's an interesting bad feeling.
It's its own feeling.
Yeah.
It's so rare. And in a polymetric texture, it definitely seems like it would be maybe harder to get back on, but perhaps the indeterminate nature of the cycle also means that, like, if you accidentally disrupt your own cycle and you reorient, the cycle isn't damaged too much, right? Because it makes the way you talk about it makes it seem like you guys kind of have a certain amount of time that you know when to play, but you might not, like, be counting whether it's like, oh, 10 cycles and I'm done, right? Or
Yeah.
is it like each individual kind of figures it out, or how does it? Yeah.
It sort of varies depending on the piece. I mean, the biggest problems are where there are cases where we're depending on somebody else doing something, and that's when it's a real problem. Or like when
Mm.
two of us, like we have one newer piece where, what's it called? After the Last Sky. It's maybe not so obvious listening to it, but like the guitar, the rhythm section, and the guitar and saxophone are in different. We're kind of in different worlds.
Guitar's like hitting that
Rhythmically
like G octave, but it shifts. Over.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we're kind of so like we're together, but we're not with the rhythm section. And so if either of us get off, it's so confused. If anybody gets off, it's so confusing,
Right.
and we don't quite have it locked together enough that it's easy to recover. But yeah, there are other cases where there are plenty of other cases where someone's just on their own in their own metric world, and then if you get off, it's not actually such a big deal because you can just sort of you can reorient else, you can just re-enter when you feel like it, and it doesn't really matter. And of course, no one in the audience can perceive that you're out of phase with yourself or whatever.
It really makes me excited for what can come next. I feel like as a band, you guys are really like honing what you do and, coming up with songs that use more notes and more difficult polymetric constructions for playing live. So it's just really great to see unfolding.
Thanks.
It's been great interviewing you. Oh, and
Yeah,
thank
great
you so
talking to you,
much.
Stephen.
Yeah.
And if you need to follow up about anything, let me know.
But, if you'd like to plug Horse Lords and wherever they are, and also your own music as well, feel free to. Maybe right now you can direct people to the places you want them to go and all of that stuff. Bandcamp is good.
Yeah, definitely. So I have not so recent album at this point, Where Is My Hand in Space? And you can find that, I think, at owengardner.bandcamp.com. And then Max and Andrew have put out solo music on a label we founded called Oma Editions. And I hope that that's at omaeditions.bandcamp.com. I'm not 100% sure about that. But anyway, if that doesn't work, you can at least search for Oma Editions and you'll find solo records by Max Heilbacher and Andrew Bernstein.
Well, adios and best of luck on the road and with all your playing. And I'll be listening to the music, of course, too.
Cool. Thanks, Stephen.
All right. Bye-bye.
Catch you later.
Thanks for listening to Now and Zen on this fantastic J.I. July, or Just Intonation July. If you enjoy what you hear on the podcast, you can leave a review on iTunes and spread the word through social media. We appreciate all our supporters on Patreon, our Zen Harmonic patrons, as well as our Zen Harmonic gods. Jacob Gross, Peter Jung, Naren Rattan, Matthew Sheeran, Hector McGuffin, Christopher Bailey, Leland O. Weigel, Amy Coleman, Jill Weigel, and Tina Harmon Carto. Remember, if you're not already doing so, you can support the podcast on Patreon. The lowest tier is only $5 a month, and you get to support a great cause, promoting microtonal music in all its delightful forms. Link is in the description. You also get access to behind-the-scenes information on many of Stephen Weigel's microtonal projects, such as numerous transcriptions, covers, or other surprises, and bonus episodes as well. You don't want to miss out on those. Thanks for listening, and catch you next time on Now and Zen, where our next month is Alien August.